a ton of is people think that because a deck isn't the highest win rate deck, it doesn't deserve a nerf, which I don't agree with whatsoever, right? This is a game first and foremost, right? And oh my God, Regal, 10K meters in the air. Where you going, Regal? Work thing? For me, a lot of it comes down to most of the players in this game are like gold. So they balance this game quite a bit on high legend players, which I think is probably correct because high legend players do play the game the best. So then it's easier to understand the statistics and not be skewed in a direction because people don't know how to respond to macro, right? But at the same time, the video I posted today was not supposed to show that this is the best deck in the game or whatever. But a comment I was reading a ton of is like, this isn't even the best deck in the game. It's Hunter. Dude, like, isn't it kind of ridiculous that in gold, players are seeing this and they're probably like turn 3, oh, I lose the game, I'm just going to concede. And that's a miserable experience. So that's why it makes a lot of sense why they are, hold on. That's why it makes a lot of sense why they are probably making this nerf is not because Mech Rogue's the most broken deck in the game. This card's obviously very snowbally, but they're making this change because most of the players who are playing against this are probably not having fun. Like imagine you are someone who doesn't really fully grasp how to beat Mech Rogue, right? Let's say like you only have one deck, you're a free to play player and you're going against Mech Rogue and you just lose on games on turn 3. That's not great for retention. And again, you can make the claim that Mech Rogue isn't the best deck at high legend, but it definitely feels bad to play against when you're losing against it from like a snowball stealth mech minion. So I actually think it's a really big deal that Hearthstone is nerfing this because you could show this to a high legend streamer and I'm sure most of them would be like, it's probably not worth it. They're not the best deck in the game, but I think the average player really appreciates this change. So like the point of my video today was literally to showcase how ridiculous the deck can actually be. And that's why I basically talked about it. Like that's why I made that video for it. But I think Hearthstone has a really big struggle of how to nerf cards because they have to remember that most of the people who play this game are not high legend players. And if I'm a designer and I'm someone who's going to balance Hearthstone, I probably would never balance the game off like gold players just because they don't understand the game at the highest level. So they're not making the correct decisions most of the time. There's definitely human error involved, but at the same time, they are players of your game. They're the highest density of players. So they have to appreciate those players when they decide to make decisions. And I think this change more than anything is probably for retention. Like they probably noticed that a lot of players in gold and diamond are not playing the game as much as they probably normally do in expansions because they're getting absolutely rolled. So that's probably why they're doing this nerf. Again, it's not because this is the highest win rate deck. This is just in gold. So that's the biggest thing. When are they going to ever look at wild balance? See, the problem is Caleb is wild. Like, let me pull up paint. So it's not even, so here's the biggest problem, right? Why this standard has like this amount of players, right? In this bubble, I would say that maybe this is wild. I'll give it a quarter perhaps, right? So this is wild right here. In that, let me just color this so people can see. Oh shit, hold on. Hold on, I gotta, all right, enough. In this bubble, right? Every single time that they add cards to this game, they have to think about the standard pool, but then they also have to think about they don't think about the wild pool because it's not worth the time and resources to consider it. But on top of that, how do they balance a card based on every single card that's ever been in the game? So it's almost impossible for them to predict something because they don't test for wild. They're literally testing for standard. If you're even thinking about money, like I'm not even considering money at this point, but if you think about like the money that the game gives, almost 100% of it is standard. Like this is all standard, 100%, right? In this pool, this is the wild, maybe where people buy packs for wild. So I don't believe that they're gonna like ever pay attention to wild. Now there is like a rumor that they are gonna do like a wild update or something. I'm really curious what that ends up being because how do they balance wild when there's so many interactions? It's really interesting. So they usually ban stuff because what is the point of testing the new balance if it doesn't really like they don't want to test the balance of wild interactions because it just does not equate to more money for Blizzard. It's not worth the time investment for them. That is, do they test for standard? They probably test for standard, but you have to remember when it comes to Blizzard, when they're making cards, they're making cards like a year in advance. So the new set Titans isn't being released or isn't being made when it's actually about to release, right? They're making it really far in advance. So the set that they're currently working on is probably coming out next year sometime. So when they make these cards, there is a subsection of, let me get paint back out because paint's actually just really, really helpful. When they make these cards, right? Actually, this is the player base that they have for their team. And then this is the amount of, like, I don't know the statistics here, but this is the amount of players, right? Think about how many more players are playing the game and finding deck lists and making the best deck list possible, and so much refinement and resources that just the Blizzard team just doesn't not have. So when they're making Mech Rogue, as much as they could probably try their best to balance the game, they probably miss a couple of things. And that's completely fine. Like, that's very hard to balance, right? You're also like testing new cards, you're also designing new cards, and they have to play against each other, and they may not be like the best players at the deck yet because they're playing other stuff at the same time, right? So it's really, really hard for Blizzard to balance. But the way that they have done the game so far recently is they have hold on, let me show you. When they released Demon Hunter, where the hell is this Demon Hunter class? Demon Hunter. When they released Demon Hunter, they released it at such a high power level because they learned from Rostacon's Rumble that it's much easier to nerf cards than it is to buff cards to the appropriate power level. Because if something is an outlier in the set, it is much easier to nerf it and just bring it down to the power level than buff a bunch of cards so they're actually fun and playable. Like, one of them is a lot less work, which is the nerfing side of things. So when they make sets now, like Festival of Legends was interesting because I just think the overall design of the expansion just wasn't super powerful to begin with. There are a lot of very slow interactions there, but Titans obviously added a lot of very powerful effects, such as the Titans, etc., etc. But it's much easier to make a card like this and be really, really strong, and then be like, oh, this card's too good, we could just nerf it. So there's a lot of things that equate to just the Hearthstone team not being able to just predict what the metagame is going to be like. You also have to remember, chat, like, designing and balancing cards is a lot harder than it seems because we're just playing the game, right? We're playing the game. So if I'm playing the game and I'm like, oh, this feels bad. I don't know. Hold on, let me get a good card. Let me get a good example here. What's a really broken card? Let's just do the rogue card. So you get this card. You get this card, right? We see this card in action in practice, and we're like, oh, this card's pretty fucking broken. How did the Blizzard team not see it, right? Like, this is disgusting. I'm losing games to this on turn four, and it's absolutely incredible that the Blizzard team's so stupid that they didn't see this happening, right? But in reality, they're not probably really testing for that because they don't have the time. They don't know what the optimal build is going to be. But if something is very broken, they can just nerf it like they're doing already, right? It's much easier for that. So it'll be interesting to see how they actually handle this metagame. Again, I think it's very powerful. But that's like the defense against Blizzard. It's very hard to design cards. Chat, like, if you guys ever think to yourself, man, how did the Blizzard team make this card? It's awful. Start designing some cards for yourself and see how hard it actually is to make a card that's not only balanced but fun. Fun is the other part about this, right? Which is very hard to do in a card game. Would have what basically is called zero-sum fun, where one player is having a really good time and the other player is not really, so that you kind of like, you have a zero-sum fun game. You want to have a positive fun game, so positive sum fun game, but you could also make cards that are just negative fun entirely for everybody, right? So a good example of that, and I've talked about this card for a while, is this. I hate that there's like a dash. It's so annoying every single time. Where is this card? Like, this card, I think is just a really poorly designed card, and I'm really glad they stepped away from this kind of design because this is just a negative sum fun card, right? So again, it's easier to criticize somebody than it is to actually design and balance cards. This isn't an excuse, by the way, because we all saw United and Stormwind. but that's what it is. That's what it is. That's my take on balancing, I guess. Is there any more questions for balancing, chat, while I'm here? Anyone? I watched the VOD of your Yu-Gi-Oh stream, started through the years of being idiots and annoying. I hope you had fun. It was all right. Probably the expansion is permanent stealth, not the 4-mana minion. So I agree with that. I really do. But I'm going to try to like take a step back and try to understand why they did it. So what year was Conceal Hall of Famed? Conceal Hall of Fame. So let's take a peek here. Hall of Fame. Okay. Conceal was Hall of Famed in 2018. I believe 2018, which was a while ago. If you don't know what Conceal is this. This is the Conceal card. They decided to Hall of Fame this card when like the classic set was still in standard, because this card caused a lot of design problems, right? It's really hard to balance a card off of this card, because if it's so powerful and your opponent just can't interact with it, they're going to be very upset, and it's not great to have in your game. So they decided to do the same kind of concept. What is it? 6 years later, 5 years later, with the mech package, with cards like, where's it? Come on, man. Where the hell is this card? I must have passed it. Hold on. I'll get there in a second once I find the card. What the hell am I? Chat, what's the card called? What's the card called, chat? It's 3. Is it 3 mana? I swear to God, it's 2. What? Am I trolling? Ah, Jesus Christ. There we go. Okay, so this card, they added it back into the game so that you can have magnetic taunt, or stealth, sorry, magnetic stealth, which in my mind, here's what happened. They tested it out in development, and they're like, oh, this isn't actually that bad, right? Stealth isn't a horrible mechanic. Like, it's just, there's ways to react to it. Priest has a bunch of silences, whatever. The problem with stealth is that it makes for a very polarizing matchup that's just not fun to play if you're the one who can't deal with it. And it feels miserable to play with when your opponent does actually answer it, right? Because you think your minion's safe and it gets rolled. So stealth is a really scary mechanic. I think the logic that they went for was, it's been 5 years since we Hall of Fame Conceal, and stealth hasn't really been an issue since. Because I can't think of like really any stealth mechanic recently that's been like a problem. Because they tried stealth with something in United Stormwind, maybe. I can't remember which expansion was from. But the issue is that this is magnetic, and magnetic allows you to only scale your minions further, which is very, very scary. Like, it's just very, very scary. And I guess they just didn't consider how powerful that could actually be when they did it. It's a lot tougher. I agree with you, though. I think they should have seen it. But it's not like stealth hasn't been in the game for a while. I don't think they realized how powerful it was with magnetic, right? So it's no longer the case, and when something is meta, the community needs to find a way to counter it. Well, in theory, like the way that, Ben Brode actually, the way that they designed their game was Ben Brode wanted you to find a counter in the metagame, right? That's how Ben Brode wanted you to play the game. And that works as long as there's tools in the game to have a metagame that adapts to what's happening. We're bringing out paint. I'm going to showcase this. Okay, here's the thing, right? If this, if this is the best deck in the game, but then this counters that deck, right? So this beats this deck, right? But then this deck becomes the best deck in the game. Oh, so then we have circle here to beat triangle, right? Oh, but now circle's the best deck in the game. Okay, well, that's sick. Well, then we're gonna have money or big S to counter the circle, right? So this is how Ben Brode wanted you to play the game. The problem with it is that if the tools aren't given to actually counter the metagame, then you have to nerf something, right? Which is what Ben Brode kind of slacked on, because if you guys remember Undertaker Hunter, it was in the game for way too long, because maybe the team thought, oh, someone will counter it, whatever, right? The way the Hearthstone team has developed it now is, let's say something's really good. So this is like the mech rogue, right? There are ways to counter it, right? You could adapt to the metagame. Like we could do the same pattern over and over again. But the new Blizzard team, which I appreciate a lot more, is balancing the game way more often, because what that allows you to do is have more adaptive metagames that don't feel necessarily the same thing, right? This is kind of a rock, paper, scissors kind of thing, which is good. but there's a way to make it so like every single class is playable if the balance is properly done. Listen, I know, okay, I'm gonna cope here a little bit, but like Blizzard recently has done a better job than that. Most classes were playable last expansion, even if you did not like it, right? But in older days of Hearthstone, there were often moments where like 2 classes, 3 classes were playable, and Blizzard did nothing. So it's a weird balancing act, right? You don't want to do it too often, because if the metagame itself can balance each other out, then that's actually like the perfect time for a game. Usually also what happens, unfortunately for Blizzard, they usually get the metagame in like a really good spot, right? So like this is the metagame, right? We're happy. This is the metagame. They get in a good spot, especially near the end of expansions. But then they're like, let me inject a mini set into this. All right, they inject a mini set into this, right? And then next thing you know, it's like the metagame that we had, which was so good, is now turned into like this, because now the balancing is all out of whack, and then we have to do the cycle all over again. And then you get it to the point where it's like, oh yeah, dude, we're back at a really, really good moment in the metagame. Oh, but now we have to drop an expansion. Oh God. So that expansion changes everything again to go like this. And sometimes we get one like this, which was Stormwind. Sometimes you get something like this, which is Ongoro. Like, it's just, there's a lot of interesting mechanics that go into just game development and balance in card games, right? As a consumer, I'm mad at the development team for not being able to balance it immediately, those freaking slackers. But in reality, it's a lot more nuanced than people make it seem. Also, the injection of cards is probably really important to the game. It is really important to the game, right? More cards means there's more interactions, more fun things to do. So I'm not against them bringing a metagame from this to this for the sake of just adding new cards into the game. I think they do a good job. And again, people, you might be like really mad at Blizzard for even releasing a card like this, but at least they're responding in a week, chat. A week. You know how long we have to wait for Mr. Ben Brode to do something? It was months. Like, if not years. It's crazy, dude. It's crazy. It was so wild. Happens at every online game. Devs have a random amnesia moment where they bring back a dumb design mechanic. Yeah, it's important to test things out too, right? Like, I can understand the reason for it. And at least they're responding to it. At least they didn't leave it into the game. That's the most important thing, right? They realized that something is a little too broken, so they decided to nerf it. So I know Ben Brode did a really interesting talk about GDG regarding his philosophy and game design. I only got to watch 20 minutes, but it's a good talk. Yeah, Ben Brode's a really smart guy. Like, the bigger thing for Ben Brode, and people don't really mention this, like I don't really mention it at all, but Ben Brode was making a game for new players. And when you make a game for new players, and this happens with, like, this is happening in League quite a bit. I always see Tyler One talking about this, which is like, here's your game. Like, this is your game. Okay. When you're someone new to the game, you want your game to stay pretty much the exact same. So over like a this is like, I'm just going to write 1 year span. Over a 1 year span, you want your game to stay relatively the same, but like maybe you have like a couple more scratches or something along here, like to just make the game more exciting, right? But what could end up, like, if you're someone who takes a break, let's say for 3 months, but there's so many drastic changes. So instead of like the top one, they do this, they make it into a fucking triangle, and then they put like a bunch of squiggly lines, and you're someone brand new coming to the game, and you're like, what the hell happened to my cards and my collection? Like, you're just probably not going to play Hearthstone. So that's what Ben Brode was doing. Nowadays, Hearthstone's been out for 10 years. So it's a lot easier for people to be like, oh, I'm so used to Hearthstone at this point, it's fine if they do all this ape shit. That's basically what it is. That's what they wanted to do. For those who complain about card balance and dev team, just make them look at custom cards made by fans. Awesome design, but really OP. It is tough. It's tough. It's tough. So, and then you have somebody like this who comes in and says, it works for me 1 out of 5 games. A win against Mecro, y'all just trash. Doesn't understand what we're talking about, but he wanted to say that to prove that he's sick of the game or something. I'm not really sure what he wanted to do there. So, yeah. All right.